Hi, this is Brascheck, and today we're talking with someone who has a lot of expertise and experience and insight into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, if you're following the Standing Rock story, you probably have heard them mentioned at least once, and there's a good reason for that. And the way our guest got experience with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is they were involved in the catastrophe in New Orleans. And it was very hard to get the actual facts about their role in the catastrophe because they were very good at dissembling, I guess we could say, to be polite about it. And to get a sense of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, way back when President Eisenhower was president, he was on record as complaining about how unmanageable they were. That's a long time ago. And also, if you look at the budget of the federal government, a big pie chart, you'll see all kinds of slices. And if the chart's big enough, you'll see that one of the slices is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is a massive bureaucracy with enormous power, and they're involved all over the country. They do some good work, but they definitely need oversight. And right now, the only significant, meaningful oversight they're getting is from citizens. And one of the best overseers of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers today is Sandy Rosenthal of levees.org. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you for having me, Ken.
Thanks for being on, because as you know, I'm saying this, not you, but as you know, our news media is not as vigorous and as energetic as we'd like it to be. So when we need actual facts about things, we have to get them ourselves. So I really appreciate that we're available for us to ask questions and get some insight into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in general and their involvement in the Standing Rock situation.
I'm most happy to do that.
So, thank you. So, we could talk about New Orleans, but maybe New Orleans will come up in the course of the conversation because you certainly learned a lot about the Corps and how they operate, both good and bad.
I could condense it to just a couple of sentences, if that
please do. That would be great.
Listeners. I've been at this 11 years, and if I can't do this by now, I should be fired. But right after the levees broke in New Orleans, the Army Corps of Engineers was the only organization with access to the facts, and that's when you can control them. And what they did is they controlled the information flow to the American media and the world, and they told the world that the levees had been overpowered by a huge storm and that the Corps had built the levees just fine. And it would be many, many years, really almost 10 years, until the true facts were actually put out in front of the American people, that the Army Corps of Engineers screwed up massively when they built these levees. But most people aren't aware of that because the Corps controlled that outflow of information. So that's it in a nutshell.
Brilliant. That's exactly what happened. And if this is news to you and you're interested in this topic, you can go to levees.org and trace all the documentation and all the huge effort that levees.org has gone through over the last 11 years to bring these important facts to the public. And the reason it's important to know this is not just limited to New Orleans, though certainly in all fairness, the truth about what happened in New Orleans really should get out. But there are U.S. Army Corps of Engineers projects like the one in New Orleans, maybe not the same scale, but still projects under their supervision, I think in every state of the union.
Wherever
really.
There's water.
Wow. So,
yes.
So wherever there's water, and that would include Arizona.
Even Arizona, yes.
Yeah, so the fact that this organization is not always doing the best possible work, and the fact that they are not forthcoming about their failures should be a concern to everybody that depends on water anywhere.
It's inherent in the organization. It's inherent to never, ever admit they've made a mistake. And hand in hand with that is covering up their mistakes, and which we'll discuss later in this session.
Great. So if you've been following the story in North Dakota, you might have heard from time to time something about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers coming up. And again, our news media has done almost nothing to explain their role in this and the significance of their role and their track record. So that's what this call is about. So, Sandy, what can you What light can you shed on, first, just the fundamentals of the story, which is how is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers involved in the Standing Rock situation?
Certainly. The Army Corps of Engineers is the organization that gives a permit to the oil companies in order to lay their drilling pipeline. All this is surrounding a pipeline that is very, very, up until September of this year, no one knew about it. Everyone's heard of the Keystone Pipeline that the Obama administration canceled. This pipeline that we're discussing now is just a few miles longer. The only reason no one knew about it is it had been sliced and diced up into little parcels, and each portion of it was approved, and it wasn't until it was ready to start digging that anyone even knew about it. The estimate is this pipeline will carry 470,000 barrels of oil a day. And this pipeline will go through Native American sacred lands and also will jeopardize drinking water for generations to come. So the Army Corps of Engineers approved the permit for the oil companies, even though 3 federal agencies opposed it, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of the Interior, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. All 3 major federal agencies said the Corps had not done a proper environmental impact statement. And this exact same thing, by the way, happened in New Orleans 40 years ago. But here we are today, and you have 3 agencies telling the Army Corps of Engineers what you've done is wrong. And on September 4th, or shortly after, the Corps did back down. And the Corps did agree to do further study on the impact to the environment. But meanwhile, the oil companies are proceeding, even though that the Corps has said more study is needed. So they proceeded right up to the edge of these tribal grounds, and on December 5th, they're supposed to proceed. So we're all watching very closely with what's going on there.
Wow, I've already learned something significant, and I can't say I've followed this story around the clock, but I completely missed this key detail that you just shared with us, that 3 government agencies, including the EPA, said no to this project.
Mm-hmm. Wow. But as you pointed out earlier, the Army Corps of Engineers is a very powerful organization, which comes from the money that they control. They have even been able to control law enforcement, and they've even been able to control the FAA. A journalist friend of mine, Georgianne Nanaba, has a photograph of a helicopter with an altered tail number. That's like you driving a car with an altered license plate. And according to any pilot you ask, they will say, for altering your tail number, both the pilot and the owner of the helicopter can, should, and will be suspended. But for some reason up in North Dakota, they've been given a pardon. They've been let off. So that goes to show you the power of the Army Corps 50 years ago and today.
Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. And also my understanding is that, you know, the people that have come out to demonstrate their concern, you know, somehow the North Dakota law enforcement and regional law enforcement and private security has gotten involved in, I think harassing is not even a fair word. I think, you know, abusing, assaulting these people. And it's remarkable because my understanding is that this company has been told they may not proceed, and they're just proceeding anyway. Am I missing something there?
No, that's what's going on. They're literally at the brink of starting work, and the Corps of Engineers still has to come through and give their permit, which they've said. Actually, the Corps did approve the permit. Now they're saying, well, we need a little bit more time to study. And meanwhile, all this is still going on, and it certainly looks, at anyone looking at this, that they're getting ready to start digging anyway. It's really rather remarkable that this is going on right here in America.
Wow. What could the Corps have done to handle this correctly? Or what? I mean, that may be obvious to people, but maybe we should elucidate it. What could they have done to handle this right?
Well, the Corps rushed their environmental impact study. The main complaint about the Native American tribe, the Sioux Nation tribe, is that they were not involved in any of these input sessions. Apparently, it's supposed to get public input. And I've seen these happen with my own eyes. That's usually what's done. But according to the Sioux Tribe Nation, that none of these public hearings were ever done. And so the tribes found out pretty much just as the oil companies are ready to dig, they're about to go right through their native sacred burial grounds, which to the Native Americans, the sacredness of these lands is something that even by my standards makes us look like we treat our graveyards, with very little respect when you compare it to the Native Americans. It's just holy to a level that is much, much different from, most Americans. And so the power, of that travesty has pulled Native Americans from all over the country up to North Dakota. And each day it's getting colder and colder up there.
Well, and not just Native Americans, but other people have gone up. Recently, a young woman from the Bronx was in that protest and very, very, very gravely injured.
Yes.
There's a possibility she'll lose her arm.
Mm-hmm. The main complaint of the Native Americans is that no one asked their input. No one asked for their input, and I think that's their main complaint. And then meanwhile, you have these three agencies, the EPA, Department of the Interior, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, again, all saying that the Corps did not do an appropriate EIS. Mainly, they're concerned with regard to drinking water, which will likely be poisoned for generations to come if you have a leak. And to say that oil pipelines don't leak is absurd. There's leaks every day somewhere in America. And there's small ones and big ones, but they're leaking every day. So that's the main concern. And most recently, the Army Corps of Engineers was in the news again because they created what they called a zone where you could exercise your right to free speech. Well, anybody who's with a rudimentary understanding of the Constitution knows you can't do that. You can't tell people when and where to exercise your First Rights Amendment. But what I found interesting was the Army Corps of Engineers' reason for creating this free speech zone. And what they said was out of concern for safety. Well, my light went off in my head because I've seen that before. And I saw that right after the levees broke in New Orleans when these levee breaches needed to be plugged up and data was disappearing every day due to the Army Corps of Engineers emergency repair and also the weather. But the Army Corps was barring or not allowing outside experts to access the breach sites over concerns for their safety. And one of these crews was an elite team of people assembled by the University of California, Berkeley, and funded by the National Science Foundation. And these people are accustomed to being at the site of major catastrophes. I mean, they're specialists with extensive experience and early arrival at earthquakes in the third world countries where there's thousands of bodies in the rubble. And issues like sanitation and safe water were even bigger problems than the earthquake. So these are the teams that were not allowed at the breach site, all out of concern for their safety. Well, clearly that's not what's going on. This is the case of the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a self-interest. In the case of the levees, it was covering up data. It was preventing data from being made accessible to the world when they wanted to know. Right after the levees broke, that's when people want to understand. That's when people are listening, not 10 years later. And now the Army Corps of Engineers has created a free speech zone out of concern for safety. And the point I'm trying to make, I'm sorry to be long-winded, is when the Army Corps says they're concerned for your safety, to me that means we, the Army Corps of Engineers, have something to hide.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I don't know if ironic's the right word, but here they are. They built these levees that weren't built correctly, which resulted in the death of hundreds of people. Well over 1,000 immediately, and I would say several thousand afterwards as a result of the shock. $100 billion of damage. I would have preferred that they be concerned with the safety of the public then, and not concerned with the trained professional engineers who were trying to do the forensic investigation into why the levees failed. It's cynical beyond belief. Why does the Army Corps of Engineers have any say in this particular pipeline at all? What's the law here?
The law is, it is the Army Corps of Engineers that issues the permit to the oil companies to go through the sacred lands. So the Army Corps is the key, holds the key to getting in the door. And as I said, they've already given the key to the big oil companies, but out of such national outrage, first it started with just the water protesters praying and doing their tribal dances, and then it grew and grew and grew until what it is today. There are a few people who look at the news on a regular basis that have not heard about what's going on in North Dakota and have not heard no DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline. But if the Army Corps issues the permit, and the Army Corps of Engineers can do the right thing, the Army Corps of Engineers can say, no, you can't do this. It is my hope the Corps may do the right thing. And on a positive note, when the Army Corps of Engineers is showered with light and attention, they have backed down. They will never, ever admit they've made a mistake, but they have been known to back down. And apparently late last night, I got up early this morning and found out that late last night, the Army Corps of Engineers has actually backed down on their free speech zone and reiterated that they will not forcibly remove anybody from any areas. But instead, what they've done now is they've changed their wording a little bit to more like, look, if you want a protest, we recommend you do it over here in the free speech zone, but if you want to do it over there where they're getting ready to drill, it said you need to be aware that it's not a safe area. So the Corps has backed down, and hopefully the Corps will back down further and not issue this permit at all, which would absolutely be the right thing to do. The Native Americans have suffered ever since the first European landed here, and the suffering has to stop sometime, and hopefully it's on December 5th.
Wow, so they were threatening to physically remove the demonstrators, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was.
That is certainly what it looked like. I mean, you look at this petition, I mean, it was an eviction notice, basically, and that is certainly what it looked like. So out of outrage and public attention and light shining, the Corps has backed down. Again, they did not admit they made an error, because the Army Corps of Engineers, and I think this is critical to understanding the Corps, are a military organization. They will never admit they've made a mistake, because in a military organization that is casting stones at a prior Corps colonel or lieutenant general, which they don't do, it's akin to bayoneting the wounded. So they will never admit they've made a mistake, and that's key to understanding how to work with the Army Corps of Engineers and how to get them to come around to, what is the right thing to do. And I've actually been advising the Native Americans on exactly how to deal with the Corps, treat them politely, recognize they won't make a mistake, and so craft your demands in a way that allows the Army Corps of Engineers to save face.
Got it. Yeah, I'm happy if they just change the order. They don't have to admit their wrongdoing. And they have jurisdiction because they have general jurisdiction over the U.S. waterways, work around the waterways. Is that what's going on?
That's a technical question. I'm not sure why the Army Corps has this power, but they have the same sort of power in South Louisiana. Anytime an oil company wants to drill a navigation channel or an oil pipeline, they have to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And apparently that's the way it is throughout this country. You need a permit to drill or do a navigation or a pipeline. It comes from the Corps. It's just the law. And
it seems they never say no.
Oh, you've got a good point there. They never say no, and they appear to be, very, very much working hand in hand with big business, apparently. And John Barry wrote a book about this exact subject. The Army Corps of Engineers and big business. Mm-hmm.
Oh, he wrote a book, an entire book about that.
Yes, the John Barry's book, the title of it escapes me for just a second, but John Barry's book that he's famous, Rising Tide, is about the Army Corps of Engineers and how it's a runaway organization that is basically uncontrollable, and they're absolutely working hand in hand with big business. I can point to it all over the place. But the Army Corps of Engineers isn't big business. It's here to protect U.S. citizens from flooding and to build navigation channels, and they shouldn't be, in the pockets of big oil. And one of the best ways to get the Army Corps of Engineers to do the right thing is shining light. It's worked before. I had no political experience, and just me and my son Stanford, he was 15 years old. We just kept shining the light, and eventually we got more and more followers. With your assistance, we got more followers, and the Army Corps of Engineers has backed down, and no longer will publicly say that, oh, the levees broke because of the storm was just too big, or the locals forced us to build the inferior system. Now they will say, yes, our levees were inadequate. It took 10, 11 years, but that's what the Corps' line now. But it's up to us, the citizens, to keep that pressure on.
That is just remarkable, because if people remember 11 years ago, the news media was completely in the pocket of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Whatever the Corps told them, that was the truth, and they broadcast it. They said that, the local levee boards were at fault, the citizens were at fault, the cities built under the sea level, therefore shouldn't be there. I mean, they came up with all kinds of excuses. We should also talk, actually, about the sock puppet activities that emanated from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers office in the New Orleans area. Sock puppet being somebody posing as somebody else and getting on the internet and making all kinds of comments. And you detected something unusual. You traced it. Tell us a little bit about that operation.
Certainly. This was very, very early on, when commenting on news stories was a kind of a new thing. This anonymous commenting online was fairly new. It was kind of the Wild West. And back in 2008, no one knew what a blog troller was, a troll. The term is pretty well known now. But a troll is someone who is paid to go online and attack anybody who is saying anything that is contrary to a certain line. So what I did is I using back-end tools available to any amateur blogger, I discovered the Army Corps of Engineers was using their equipment at headquarters to log on to my website and attack me and anyone who supported me. And I did this with something called an IP address, which is basically a telephone number, like anyone's telephone number that you can tell, well, yep, like, Ken, you have a phone number, and I see on caller ID that was you. And that's basically, in a nutshell, how I discovered the Army Corps of Engineers abusing their role and attacking me because I was out there obviously doing a pretty good job of saying, no, this is the Army Corps of Engineers' fault. This isn't our fault for living here. And at first the Corps denied it, but then when I showed them the proof, it ended up in a Pentagon investigation and a personal apology from the Corps commander. But I had to actually go in there and give them the proof.
Well, they not only attacked you personally, they were also going on different boards. They were on the Times-Picayune board, I believe, and
yes,
and posing as if they were just average citizens outraged by your lunacy.
Yes.
I don't know what they were doing.
Yes. Basically, it's people at the Army Corps of Engineers were disguising their identities, pretending that they're not involved in all of this, and then using online tools, community tools, to attack me and anyone who supported me, and anyone who lived in New Orleans as well.
They also attacked New Orleans, the citizens of New Orleans in general. I think there were some rather rude remarks made about, those stupid people, those, reckless,
Yes, it was very embarrassing for the Corps.
And this came, in case anybody's not following exactly what we're saying here, this emanated from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers computers polluting the news stream and the public discourse, trying to make it seem as if Americans were against New Orleans, against New Orleanians, against Sandy Rosenthal, against levees.org, and none of it was true.
Oh, it was an embarrassing moment for the Army Corps of Engineers.
And by the way, this is not something that we're speculating happened. This is something that happened, evidence gathered, and the Corps actually formally apologized. So this is something that they do. This is something that they do. If anybody's ever visited Louisiana, New Orleans in particular, when you're flying over southern Louisiana, you look down and you see all these straight lines that are carved through the wetlands. And my understanding, I don't know if you're up on this, particular fact, but my understanding is every one of those canals or whatever they've done down there, first of all, they've destroyed the wetlands in southern Louisiana. They've decimated it. Every one of those was supposed to be repaired after the purpose for which it was built was completed.
That's correct.
And okay, so that is correct. And so obviously that's never been done. They gave the permits. The permits were based on an understanding that once they built the pathway to the well or to whatever it was they needed to do, that waterland was going to be restored. Never been done. And that is what puts New Orleans at tremendous risk to this day, because I think my understanding is when New Orleans was originally settled, the Gulf of Mexico was 150 miles away. And now, because of the decimation caused by shipping and the oil industry, the Gulf of Mexico is right on the doorstep of the city, which makes a huge difference if there's a storm.
That's true. Just to be clear, there's a combination of the degradation of the wetlands with a combination of the Army Corps of Engineers levying the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio River, depriving the delta of sediment. That's one cause, but another cause, which is more easily visible and obvious for anyone that will look, is those navigation channels and pipelines that you spoke about that crisscross and zigzag and have destroyed the wetlands because of erosion and saltwater intrusion. And by the way, the reason the oil companies got away with not fixing the damage they caused was a loophole in all the contracts. And there's a loophole that said that we're going to leave this well here and as an orphaned well, quote unquote orphaned, and we're going to come back later and make sure we got all the oil, and then we're going to fix our damage. And that was the loophole for every single one of those 10,000 wells.
Wow.
The damage wasn't fixed. It was a loophole, and I have to point out that the state of Louisiana could have enforced it and did not. And so the state of Louisiana and the government is to blame as well. But that's like blaming the police because of the criminals' work. It's kind of a combination. But yeah, thank you for explaining that to your listeners, and that's very important.
Well, that's just unbelievable. So unbelievable. So I can dig an oil well, make a complete mess of the environment, and if I just say, well, I might come back someday and get the rest of the oil, that's okay. That's
okay. And of course they don't come back. Of course they don't.
Wow. Well, we can just see, and really anybody going to New Orleans, look out the window as you're flying over southern Louisiana. That's not natural what you're seeing down there. So we have not only major environmental degradation, but we have an entire major metropolitan area of the United States at perennial risk caused by this. You know, when people say, "Oh, maybe we need to give the oil companies and the Army Corps of Engineers the benefit of the doubt in North Dakota," you know, they say they won't leak any oil. They say it's safe to put a pipeline underneath a lake. We should take them at their word. I don't think they should be taken at their word based on their previous experience.
I completely agree. And this is why I have, as soon as I found out about this issue, have stuck my nose in and my 2 cents in and have advised the Indians, you know, what to do, what not to do, you know, suggest this, suggest not that. And I remain committed to following this. I've done everything but get on a plane and fly up there. And I'm actually thinking about doing just that. So I'm very engaged in this issue, and I think everyone should be.
Wow.
Even if you're just going to comment on the story and share it, that's engagement, that's involvement.
Absolutely, because that's really, you know, we refer to the news media, but there's not a whole lot of coverage of this story in the actual news media, the so-called news media. Most of it's coming from alternative sources. Certainly the public discussion is being handled by citizens via the internet. We don't hear a lot of intelligent commentary or accurate commentary on the internet. I saw the CEO of this company was allowed to get on the air not long ago and just spout utter nonsense, and nobody challenged him, nobody questioned him. Whatever he said was acceptable. Are there any protests at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers offices going on, as far as you know?
Yes, there was a protest about I think a week and a half ago. It was the day after the election, so that was November 9th. November 9th. I was there. It was extremely well attended. I was actually kind of surprised 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday. There was a protest. We weren't allowed on Corp premises, but we marched in front of the building and marched about a mile in front of the building. And I was pleased to see that the strong attendance. That was encouraging. It's difficult to get people to get up and protest. It's difficult to get them to join in and offer their voice. No, it's intimidating for some. I find it empowering. And so whenever anyone needs someone to come out and protest, I go, I'll go.
I wonder if it wouldn't be good somehow, if anybody's listening who can do anything about this, to have a demonstration at the Corps' headquarters, which I guess is in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, D.C. Yes, it is. Yes,
yeah, I mean, that might be an interesting thing for people to think about doing. So
I will point on I would like to comment, just to touch on something you said, which is so true. You comment on the media hasn't done a very good job of covering the story. For 11 years, I found the media does a terrible job of covering the Army Corps of Engineers' failure in New Orleans, and now they're doing a terrible job of covering the Army Corps of Engineers' failure in North Dakota. And I've puzzled over this, and to the best of my knowledge, it's the power that the Corps has in their hands, that they have the power to get people fired, they have the power to get people hired. And I've seen a member of the Washington Post afraid of the Corps. I heard him point something out to me, and he said, "Don't tell the Corps." And he's obviously afraid. And I have to ask myself, what is a journalist for the Washington Post afraid of? That they won't say anything critical about the Corps. I find that the best reporters, the best questions I get come from European journalists, that the U.S. journalists are somehow intimidated or somehow afraid that the Corps has something that they can do that they're afraid of. And I'm going to find out what it is. I'm still working on it. They can't hurt me. They can't fire me. They can't hire me.
I bet they'd love to fire you. I always say, Sandy's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' worst nightmare.
Yes. Because
she's so relentless and so thorough, and when she brings information to the public, it is thoroughly vetted by the world's leading experts. For instance, when the task was to prove that the levees were poorly designed, she got the top forensic civil engineers in the country to relook at their own assessment, which to their credit, many of them did, and they concluded, wow, this was an engineering disaster, not a natural disaster. It appears that somehow the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. oil industry are, I don't know, twin brothers or cousins or partners in crime?
Yes. I'm certainly not the first to see this and to scratch my head about it. Garrett Graves, who is now a congressman in Louisiana, has been screaming about this issue. Also, John Barry has been screaming about this issue, and someone that everyone in the country knows, Lieutenant General Russell Honoré, who is the hero who arrived boots on the ground 2 days after Hurricane Katrina. He has taken on this issue of how the Army Corps of Engineers and big oil seem to be working hand in hand toward the same goal. So fortunately, this isn't a secret. This is something that's been going on, and how to attack it has been a challenge. Believe me, if we'd have figured out how to attack it, we'd have done it by now. But at this point, the best thing that I find that is effective is shining the light and talking about this and putting it out there, because the American people may be busy and distracted, but they're not stupid.
No, I'm absolutely sure the reason that the news media is working so hard not to tell the story and not to present the relevant details is who's ever controlling them, intimidating them, or paying them off, or a combination of all three, knows that if the American people understood the basics, just the basic facts of the story, there would be widespread outrage. But if people don't know, if they've been given an impartial, an incomplete and often false narrative, how are they to know? For instance, I mean, I think this little piece of information is critical to understanding this story, that this oil, you could almost make a case that, gosh, we need oil to keep our economy running, and we've just got to get this oil, and we got to move it down. Well, this oil is earmarked for export. This oil is not for our country. It's not for the U.S. It's for the oil companies that are pumping it and selling it, and that this was made possible by the reversal of a law that I believe is 40 years old, which banned the export of oil from this country. And this, countries have resources, and they're entitled to protect their resources and use them for the purposes of their future. And somehow that law got overturned, and this is what the pipeline is for. It's to take the oil out of North Dakota, send it to the Gulf, possibly refine it down there, I'm not sure, but ultimately ship it away from our country. So this isn't even for the benefit of the United States. It's for the benefit of a very small number of people. And that crucial piece of information has not been gotten out.
You raise a very, very good point. It's amazing how key pieces of information get buried. And it takes geeks there's a bit of geek in you, and I know I'm a geek. I read 1,000-page reports, and that's where you find things that are not in the executive summaries. And that's often where, the glory is, reading.
Yeah.
And another thing that you said that I think is important, one of the easiest ways to pull the wool over the American people's eyes is to tell them a lie that fits their worldview, to tell them a lie that they don't have to change things they believe in order to accept it. Those are the easiest to accept. But the truths that upset the apple cart, those are very, very difficult to put out there. If it upsets their worldview, if it challenges the way they thought things are supposed to be, those are the difficult ones. And those are often the challenges that in getting the truth out there. And I think recognition of that fact, recognition that you're going to upset someone when you give them this information, I think that changes the way you deliver it to them. You maybe sweeten it a little bit when you hand it to them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's something that I wish someone had told me 11 years ago when I was faced with the task of telling the American people that their federal government almost destroyed an American city.
Yeah.
So anyway, something you said reminded me to point that out, and that is often how people are fooled. They're being given wrong information that fits their worldview.
I think that's a really important insight. We want to believe that the people who are in positions of trust are always trustworthy. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're immensely trustworthy, but sometimes they're not. And they can be untrustworthy about the most consequential things, like, for instance, the flooding of New Orleans, which, to take this full circle, if there's anybody listening that didn't know this, Hurricane Katrina is not what caused the devastation of New Orleans. It was a Category 3 hurricane. It didn't hit New Orleans directly, maybe tore some tiles off people's roofs and, caused some of that kind of damage. But the catastrophic damage that killed hundreds and hundreds of people and destroyed at a minimum at least $100 billion worth of property and almost destroyed the city permanently had to do with engineering. It was an engineering failure.
Levees that would have broken in a rainstorm. It happened to be a hurricane storm surge that broke them, but a severe rain could have caused them to break. They broke 4 feet from the tops of the walls, at 50% of what they were designed to withstand. But of course, as I mentioned before, the Army Corps of Engineers was the only organization with the facts in those early weeks, months, and years. And by the time the information came out, the American people had moved on.
Yeah, they not only didn't disclose the facts, they actively worked to obscure the facts, hide the facts, and misrepresent the facts, and directly and through their various agents. Because how many millions of dollars did they spend on PR?
Well, I happen to. That's interesting you brought that up. That really was another embarrassing moment for the Corps. They paid a PR company $5 million to improve their image. And I happened to discover this. I obtained this information, and I put that out there, picked up by CBS News, the Associated Press. It says, when the American people heard that the Corps paid a PR company $5 million to improve their image, that's outrageous. That's the sort of thing that people understand. That people understand. I need to be outraged about that, and they were. That was a very, very important story that did change the way that people felt about this revered Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, the name, the Army Corps of Engineers, just the name, it makes people think, wow, that's something I'm supposed to respect. And the Army Corps of Engineers has 2 centuries of experience and a sterling reputation. So why would anyone think that the Army Corps of Engineers had made a mistake? Or it must be those New Orleans officials. It must be the storm. It must be that the city is below sea level. It can't possibly be the Army Corps of Engineers, and it was. But the Army Corps of Engineers fought to keep that information away from the American people, and they almost got away with it.
And I want to go on record for everybody listening so that you clearly understand they would have gotten away with it had it not been for levees.org. It was not the media. It was not, investigative reporters. It was none of that. It wasn't ABC or CBS or NBC or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post. None of those organizations, wasn't CNN, wasn't Fox, wasn't MSNBC. None of those organizations were at all involved in trying to understand what really happened. It was citizen action, in this case, Sandy Rosenthal, founder of levees.org, and all the levees.org members that brought these facts to light. And it was an 11-year battle that still goes on. And if we bring this back to the Dakota situation, it would be great if people were to understand that it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that made this whole mess possible in the first place by
not doing their job,
they never should have permitted.
By not issuing that permit.
Let me ask you this, because, look, as you mentioned, 3 federal agencies, including the lead agency on environmental protection, said, no, you can't do this. This is a very bad idea. This puts the environment, this puts our precious, irreplaceable water resources at risk. We can't do this. And yet they just ignored it and went ahead. I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know the answer to this. What influence does a president, for instance, in this case, currently Obama is still president, does he have any ability to come in and say, hey, Corps, you work for us, you work for me, I don't know who they work for. That's maybe the problem.
The Army Corps of Engineers works for the Secretary of Defense, who reports to the president.
Okay.
And the answer to your question is, like the Keystone Pipeline, the Obama administration can shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline. It can.
Wow. Well, people need to know that he has the power to stop this madness, this injustice, this inhumanity, and for whatever reason, he's choosing not to exercise that power. And as he said in his own words, I don't know if you heard him say this, he's just going to let it ride.
And interesting. I'm not a political commentary. This is political. It's a political decision, and I find it remarkable that the president has taken such a stance, because this pipeline, the only difference between this pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline is it doesn't cross an international boundary. Keystone did, this one does not, but it's the same length and can do the same damage. So that's a puzzler for me.
So points of impact that people could have, one would be to contact the Obama president, Barack Obama White House while he's still president. And my understanding, and this I got from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that Obama could maybe not stop it forever, but he could freeze it and create a multi-year paperwork problem for anyone trying to get this done, which would be great because it would give citizens the chance to mount their resources against it.
Mm-hmm.
So people could put pressure on the White House to do the right thing. I hear this particular man, he's so interested in his legacy, so concerned with his legacy. This is not a good legacy to leave. So that's one point of influence. Another point of influence might be directly to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers itself. I don't know if it receives public comments, but if there is a place where they receive them, everybody listening to this should make a polite comment on the unsuitability of this project. Another point of influence might be to contact to the extent they listen to us, the various media outlets, and say, why aren't you telling this story? And when you do tell it, why are you giving it to us in a fragmentary, incomplete, and often incorrect way?
My experience with the media is that they're quite thin-skinned, and their feelings get hurt very easily. I think a third and perhaps more better way to help this is to support the water protectors. They need medical supplies. They need food. Jane Fonda has sent some bison, I understand, to feed them. I think that might be better, more effective than trying to get the media to do the right thing.
Great. Thank you for keeping us from going into a quagmire from which we'd never return. I know the efforts that you've had to go through over the last 11 years to get the various news outlets to stop calling the devastation that happened in New Orleans, Katrina. I mean, that was a full-time job, and many, many, many people had to get involved and are still involved in trying to get them to do that. Do you have any particular group or method that you recommend to where to give help to the water protectors? Is there an organization that's...
Yes, Facebook has set up a site that will list the items that the water protectors need. Masks for when they're sprayed with mace is on there, food items, flashlights for at night, because often they're attacked at night and they can't see. And so if you go to Facebook and type in, I believe it's Standing Rock Sioux Nation, SOIUX, and there is someone was clever enough to set up exactly what they need, so they don't get sent things that they don't need, like they don't need ice.
You're right.
Yeah.
And they don't need Grandpa's old ties from your attic. I always have to tell people that after disaster, please don't empty out all the clothes that you don't even want to have around anymore and send them to people in need, because they don't need that. They need everything else but that. Great. So I just went to the internet and I see, here's Standing Rock Sioux.org. StandingRock.org has a website. And then you said Facebook. Let me just double check this.
Facebook, yeah. That's how I sent some of the flashlights.
I got it. Standing Rock. Exactly. So everybody, if you type in Standing Rock Sioux Facebook, and Sioux is spelled the French way, SIOUX. You will come up with the Facebook page that Sandy's talking about. And somewhere on here, I'm hoping that there's specific information on the last post to this November 15th. Maybe Sandy, after the call, if you happen to find the exact link, if you could email it to me, I'll make sure that it's included in this.
I can absolutely do that, and I'd like to let your listeners know why this is important. Because if the Standing Rock Nation gives up, it's over, and it's all up to them. They have to get up every single day and keep fighting, and for all you know, one gift of a flashlight or of some food, that might be just the thing it took to keep these people, to keep this person that received this from saying, I'm done with this. I'm cold. I'm hungry. I'm going home. And that gift could be, all it takes for them to keep going. And I know, because I've been there. I have been so close to saying, what am I doing? Why? I had no idea this was going to be so hard. It was going to take so long. It was going to be so frustrating. And sometimes it's just one person saying, is there anything I can do? If someone pressed a dollar bill in my hand, and that was enough for me to say, yep, I'm not going to give up. So that's another reason that I recommend helping in this way, in addition to contacting the President and the Army Corps of Engineers.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that's a great point to end this, with action and with a reminder of the enormous sacrifices that Standing Rock people and not just surrounding, but Indian nations throughout the United States and other helpers are doing up there in this brutal situation. I mean, it's cold here in New York. I can't even imagine how cold it is in North Dakota with people being, and if you're not aware of this, folks, people are being sprayed with fire hoses in this sub-freezing temperature.
20 degrees.
I mean, it's just beyond belief, but we're not going to despair. We're going to fight. and we're going to call the White House, let them know what we think. We're going to call the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We'll have all these numbers on the page below. We're going to call the White House, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and to the extent you're able, send something to the Standing Rock Nation and give them the material support they need to continue this battle, which is being waged for all of us. This is not a local, if anybody thinks this is, this just only has to do with, one Native American group. No, this is the entire water supply of the United States is at risk when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does things like this, which is permit reckless, dangerous, pointless, non-productive uses of America's waterways, which is exactly what they're doing in North Dakota. So Sandy of levees.org, thank you so much for the time, your experience, your insight, and your service that you've done for not only the people of Louisiana and New Orleans, but people all over the country who care about what's going on with our country.
Well, I thank you so much. You and I need to talk more often. This has been, I think, good for both of us, and certainly good for Standing Rock Sioux Nation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.